Yeah.
Like, how good morning. That $1,500 a month, $1,585 that we pay for this house,
Mm-hmm.
is spread out over 30 years, which your most house knows.
Yeah.
Even them have a $300,000 house, way more expensive than ours. What the fuck is that?
A Zoom call. What? Talk.
I'm not talking on a Zoom.
They can't hear you.
Who is that?
No, I actually think we can hear you, bud.
Oh, shoot. My bad.
That's my point. He doesn't know how to work anything.
I'm in my night. Okay, I'm going to mute everybody. And you're all welcome at any point to unmute yourself and ask questions. It's getting to be about time to start. We are up to 85. Yeah, I didn't think 100 people would show up. So let me quickly see. Not what I wanted to do. Just trying to get a couple last people in here. I apologize. Okay. I think we are ready to go. So thank you everybody for coming. Looks like we have 98. I never thought it would be like this. I really appreciate the interest. So I'm going to jump right in. My name is Bart Smith. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at Utah State University. I'm not a baseball guy. I've been working on baseball aerodynamics for about 2 years now, and things have kind of come to a head over the last little while, partially because of our own work and partially because of the advent of Hawkeye. That's really what's new here. So I'm going to show you the kind of the marriage of what those two things tell us. I'm going to share my screen. If you have questions as I go, I'm fine with you asking them along the way. We'll see how that works. And if that becomes an issue, I may shut that down. It never has in the past, but we've never had anywhere near this number. Let me mention some of the people I've been working with on this. Andrew Smith is a former student. John Garrett is my current student. You're going to see some of his brand new stuff today. Nasmus is the first student that worked on this. So I went from Nasmus to Andrew to John. Many of you probably know Jared Hughes is a major league pitcher. We worked together a lot on this. He's taught me a lot. And then recently we wrote an article, Alan, Nathan, Harry Pavlidis and I, And I think a lot of these folks are on the call. So I wanted to just say thanks to all of them. Let's see, I got to let a couple people in here. And it's not letting me do it. Oh, here we go. Okay. So most people, when they talk about baseball aerodynamics, like to talk about it from, you'll hear a lot of people, and they're usually waving their hands when they do it, and I've been known to wave my hands too. So, but they talk about it from the point of view of usually transition from laminar to turbulence. You hear that a lot. And I really want to try to get you to think more about how the pressure in the air around a baseball changes. And so if you, the first thing you have to understand is the pressure on the front of the ball is very high, and it's easy to intuitively guess that, because if you open your car door, you're going to have high pressure on the outside of it and low pressure on the inside, and you'll feel that causing a force pushing it back on you. Even easier, if you stick your hand out the window, you'll feel it pushing back, and you say, well, I feel wind. What you're actually feeling is the pressure on your hand. It's pushing you back because you're making that air stop. And that generates pressure. The pressure generates a force. Well, that all happens on balls too. I'm going to start with a golf ball here because it's easy to understand. This is a golf ball moving about 85 miles an hour to the left. I'll explain these colors later on, but what's important is that you can see that the air flows along the surface, and at some point it comes off. We call that the separation point. I'm going to be using that term a lot tonight. And I've marked those locations where that happens with this blue and the red arrow. Blue and red are this, it's just doesn't make any difference which we have on this. So don't worry about whether it's blue or red. We're just marking where the separation happens. And the reason that that is important is that we have high pressure on the front of the ball. As the air goes around the ball, the pressure starts to get low. When it passes the middle of the ball, it starts to get high again. If it made it all the way to the back here, pressure on the back of the ball would be the same as it is on the front. And that'd be slick because your ball wouldn't slow down at all. There'd be no drag. The drag is mostly coming from the fact that the pressure is high here and it's low here. The really important point is that all of this part of the ball that's in the wake of the ball has the same pressure. It stops changing once this separation occurs. So this is a non-spinning ball. If I spin that ball, oops, let me see if I can spin that ball. Of course. Oh, there we go. What I want you to notice is that when it's spinning, like in this frame, as opposed to that one, the blue arrow moves backward and the red arrow moves forward. That's Magnus effect. Magnus effect, it changes the separation points on the top and the bottom of the ball. And as a result, now the pressure on the top of the ball is different than it is on the bottom of the ball. And that's what causes what's in this case a lateral force and make this ball move upward as a result of that spinning. So we've been dealing with Magnus for forever. Any golfer, any baseball player, any soccer player intuitively knows what Magnus is. It's helpful though, for me anyway, to think about Magnus like this. Magnus will make the front of the ball, or it'll make the ball move towards the direction that the front of the ball is moving. So you see Bauer's pitch here, front of the ball was moving up, so that tended to go up. Here's a curveball. The front of the ball is moving down now, and so that's going to make that ball break downward. I wanted to thank Michael Augustine for making those two videos for me just for this presentation tonight. And they're beautiful, and I think that really helps me visualize this stuff. So this is what Magnus does. The previous slide was showing you how it works. And the reason I want to show you how it works, in addition to what it does, is because seam shifted wake, which is what this talk is about after all, is the same thing. It's a way to modify where this separation occurs. But instead of it being because the ball is spinning, it's because of where the seams are. So Magnus effect, it generates a force in the ball. That force increases with how fast it's spinning. It increases with how fast the ball is moving. It's very well understood. All the StatCast data that we have from years and years of baseball is data that tells us how strong the Magnus force is. And people collect all that and tune the models so that they are very good at telling us exactly how much Magnus force there is. Up till now, we've tended to think it was the entire story. And I'm here to tell you that it's not, that there's another force on the ball that's almost as important. It's on the same magnitude as Magnus effect, and we're calling that seam shifted wake. So the takeaway is if you can break the symmetry of the wake, if you can make it early on one side compared to the other, you can make a force on the ball. Spin or Magnus effect does that, but I'm going to show you seams can do it too. And the reason that this isn't already super well known, other than we've had trouble measuring it, is that it's hard to make that happen where you have a seam that's on that this isn't just happening randomly on both sides of the ball. You have to somehow organize the seams so that they work for you and not just randomly. That's a little bit tricky. So this is an animation from a couple of years ago that shows what I'm trying to show here. And this is old data. We're making prettier pictures than this now, but this is an old high school baseball. And what I'm trying to show here is that this blue dot is marking where that separation occurs every time that ball goes around. These balls are actually spinning, by the way. This is like 9 or 10 different baseballs that were captured at the instant that they flew by, but they are spinning, and you can see that the wake is deflected downward. But what's important here is you notice that this separation point shown with that blue dot is moving around, and it moves every time the seam comes by. This was our first clue that seams modify where that separation happens. John made this one for me just today, and it's quite a bit prettier. This is a four seam orientation instead of two. But notice this blue dot, how it is attracted to that seam and moves along with it for a little while and then pops back off. There's a region here near the what I call the middle of the ball, or the we'll call it the hemisphere plane later on, where the seam will affect where that separation happens. Now this is separation this is spin. We're looking at seams that are moving through the same plane it's spinning in. Most of the time when I'm talking about seam shifted wake, I'll be talking about the other plane, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But so these seams are always doing this. They're making the wake move up and down as the ball spins, but they're causing it to move one way at one point of the rotation and another way at another point. And then the net effect of that is zero. It's just Magnus effect. And you can see the wake tilted downward as a result. This ball is being pushed upward. So staying on that point, trying to stay on that point. If I'm this blob of air, when I hit the front of the ball, my pressure gets very high. It gets low as I go around the side, and then it starts to increase again. But when that separation occurs, it stops changing. This is all at the same pressure. So these separations happened both sides of the ball at the same point in space here, the same distance to the back of the ball, and so they don't do anything. But if I change the orientation of the ball, so now this seam is causing this separation early, now the pressure on the ball is not the same on the top and the bottom. And what matters is, this tends to occur when you have a seam that's near the middle of the ball, like this line I've drawn here. So this is the main picture that we want to use to show this. This wake is deflected the opposite direction, but I have high pressure on the front of the ball, very low pressure here on the top and the bottom of the ball. But when the separation occurs, it's the same everywhere back there. So that means that this low pressure region on the top is smaller than it was on the bottom. And that means you have a sideways force, and this ball is being pushed downward as a result. So this ball is not spinning, by the way. It's moving straight to the left and not spinning. And you can see that wake looks a lot like the wake from Magnus effect. My claim has always been that when seam shifted wake effects occur, they are about the same as Magnus. The question is, can we make them happen as often or for as much of the rotation as Magnus does? That's the tricky part. So Andrew Smith came up with the term seam shifted wake, and he claims to have a trademark on it. So if anybody uses this, I can give you his phone number, and you can pay him whatever he claims that you would owe him for that. That's a joke I've made about 150 times, and I always enjoy it. Hope you enjoyed it too. Okay, so I wanted to take a step back just for a second and talk about how we make these measurements in case you're curious. Let's see here. Sorry. So we launched the ball with a cannon. This cannon is shown here. It can launch the ball up to 150 miles an hour. Almost everything you're going to see in this presentation is about 90 miles an hour. This is developed at Washington State University in their sports science lab, Lloyd Smith's group. And Jeff Kendrud is the guy that makes them. He has a company called Second West Consulting, and you can buy them from him And I would recommend that you do. I think it's a fantastic tool. It would be great for a baseball team. I'll show you why in just a minute. That's the way that I showed you here is what we would do if we weren't spinning the ball. There's nothing on the end of the cannon. We're just putting the ball on a tee and firing it forward. If we want to spin the ball, we add this attachment that they call a flex tip. The neat thing about this, let me see if I can put myself back on the screen here. Yeah, I need to be able to see what I'm doing here. The neat thing about this is kind of, I think of this kind of like a hand. You push this, the ball into this thing, and the top of it is sticky and the bottom of it's slick. You can see the Teflon right here. And the tip compresses the ball a little bit. And so the further I put it in there, it squeezes it more and more. And now when the cannon hits the end of its travel, it stops moving, the ball comes out, and it will actually spin as a result of sticking to that one side. So I can make it spin however fast I want, up to about 3,000 RPM. There's no RPM knob on this thing. I have to kind of iteratively figure out how far to put it into the jaw in order to make it spin as fast as I want. And then I can repeat it just by putting this set screw there, so that I just push it up against that set screw. But the really cool thing, and the reason I think it'd be great for a team, is that if I have a fastball like this and I want to throw a curveball, all I do is reach in and turn that thing 180 degrees, and now I got a curveball. And I don't have to change the speed of the wheels or anything like that. I can make it go straight sideways or go straight sideways the other way. So it's super repeatable. It's really revolutionized our measurements. We couldn't do most of what we're doing without it. We fire the ball into this measurement space. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. When it arrives there, it trips these two lasers to let us know that it's there. And after a small delay, we fire these green lasers to light the ball up. So those are essentially like flashlight or flash bulbs, but they're not. It is a sheet, and it's slicing the ball right down the middle, so that we see what the flow looks just like on the middle of the ball. And that's what you've been looking at so far. So when I take data, it looks like this. This is slow motion off my iPhone. So you see the ball coming in there. You may see it hit these red lasers, and then I don't know why. Sometimes I can see the green flash, and sometimes I can't. Hopefully that's coming through. If I do that with the lights on, looks like this. This is in real time. Let me go back there, not because you get tired of hearing that, but the camera's right here. You can see a laser down there. This is the sensors that see it coming through, and it is moving 90 miles an hour. So it's pretty spectacular when it happens. You might see the fog floating around in there. That's what we actually measure, is the movement of those fog particles. It looks like this when we take that picture. This isn't doctored at all. This is exactly what it looks like when we get it out of the camera. And those are two pictures I'm showing you there. We're alternating back and forth between them. We take them about 20 microseconds apart. And so if you look out here, you see these particles really aren't moving at all. But if you look here in the wake of the ball, you see them moving quite a bit. You see a lot of rotation in there and things like that. And then we put that information into our computer, and some magic happens, and it spits out something like this. So in this case, I've colored everything blue. It turns out that's really hard for me to do. And so I just usually end up with it blue and red, and I ask you to ignore that part of it's blue and part of it's red. It all means the same thing. So this ball has no seams anywhere near the middle of the ball, and the flow is separating off kind of just behind the middle of the ball, which is pretty normal. So now I want to show you some more of this data. Here is a ball that's kind of in a two-seam configuration, and I'm going to capture it at different orientations. So we just set it on the tee in different orientations and fire it through. And what I want you to notice is that this separation is occurring on that seam over this wide range of angles. If I go too far, it's no longer happening. If I'm too far the other way, it's no longer happening, but it follows that seam around. And that's really the whole thing. In 4-seam configuration, this is kind of similar to the video I showed you earlier, so I probably won't spend a lot of time on it. But this ball, unlike the one in the video earlier, is not spinning. So what you see here is that the weight could go both directions. Here it is going down, and here it is going up. And it's just because of the action of either this seam causing it to move up in that case, or this seam causing it to move down in the other case. And it's just a small change in rotation between those two. So it's a very, what we call nonlinear effect. It's a small change in position can make a huge change in what this does, which is part of what makes it so interesting. Okay, so Andrew fired a lot of baseballs. I think it was about 100 to make this map. And the maps over here, I just want to relate it to a real baseball here. This is that hemisphere plane. If you think of that being as a slice through the middle of the ball, or more specifically, a slice that's through the ball perpendicular to the direction the ball is moving. So if the ball is moving straight across, then it's straight up and down. And I used, normally when I give this presentation, I spend a lot of time talking about when that's not the case. I'm really not going to do that today. It seems to confuse people. So just imagine that this slice is always straight up and down through the ball. And what Andrew found was that if you have a seam that's anywhere from 6 degrees to 18 degrees behind that slice through the ball, it's going to cause separation. And this is an example of that right there. That is within this little triangular 18-degree slice right there. And it's causing separation. This seam is way beyond that. It's way back here. It's not doing anything at all. This seam is out here in this green. It's not doing anything. This seam is out here. It's not doing anything. But this one is active. We call it active. It's in there. If you don't have any seams in that region, it's going to separate somewhere out here. And so that's kind of our current state of the art for our model on this, is to say it's seam shifted. If I have a seam in that region, and that means there's a force in the ball, we turn it on. And we're currently working on making that a little bit more nuanced, a little more sophisticated, to hopefully get more accurate prediction of what seam shifted wake will do. I'll talk more about that later on. So this came to me very far into this process, that knuckleballs are seam shifted wake pitches. They're probably the first one you ever saw, or the first one you ever knew about. That's how they work. They don't, again, I hear a lot of, well, the seams are causing turbulence and blah, blah, blah. I think the seam's causing an early separation on one side of the ball, and therefore the ball moves. This one that Kratz threw this year, which everybody loved, is really interesting to me, because you notice that it's initially straight and it's initially not spinning, and it breaks left and it starts to spin at exactly the same time. And I don't think that's a coincidence at all. I think that's when that seam started causing an early separation on one side. It made a force on the ball and also made a torque on the ball. And since the ball isn't spinning, it doesn't take much torque to change how it's spinning. So this is really, it's a random effect. And the fact that there's this feedback, that when it starts to cause a force in the ball, it also reorients the ball. That's what makes them so random. It's a very chaotic system. So what we really need to figure out if we want to make seam shifted wake pitches is how to stabilize that, how to make that happen in the same direction all the time. And I'm showing an example here where you could do that. If you have a baseball that is has an axis, a certain axis, you can spin the ball such that one side of that two seam is there most of the time, about 3/4 of the time. And if that were there, our knuckleball data, or our non-spinning baseball data, show us that I would get this separation off of this side and the ball would be pushed downward. Now notice that the Magnus effect, if this ball were moving to the left, the Magnus effect would be in straight towards me, right? That's the direction that the front of the ball is moving. But this would make it move downward. So it's in a totally different plane than the Magnus effect, or at least it can be. And I'll show you it can act against Magnus, it can act with Magnus, but it tends to act in most cases along the axis, which is 90 degrees off of Magnus. So we studied these in our lab in captivity so that we can watch them all the time and make sure that we know what they're doing. And we have two pitches that we've named. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about looper. Scuffball is kind of a small change off of that. These require a specific seam orientation, so I would claim that they're seam shifted wake pitches. They work on any efficient pitch, and when I say any efficient pitch, I mean that they could work on a fastball, a changeup, or a curveball if it had high enough efficiency, and they can be thrown with conventional pitching machines. And this is a really important point. We struggled in our lab for a long time trying to make a seam shifted wake pitch happen, because it turns out that any pitching machine that any of you own or that I own throw only perfectly efficient pitches. And I find that I see some people nodding, and I appreciate that. I find that a lot of dyed-in-the-wool baseball people with major league teams don't know that, and I've had some arguments with some very smart people about it, and but it turns out that seam shifted wake likes gyro. In fact, if you go to my Twitter feed, you'll see my pinned tweet is, have you tried more gyro? If you go back, I would claim, you go back and watch this sketch, ask yourself, are you sure that he's saying cowbell and he's not saying gyro? I think he might be saying gyro. So without any gyro, or to say with 100% efficient pitch, we can still generate a seam shifted wake pitch, but it's harder. It requires a more precise orientation of the baseball. So we did that. We came up, after a lot of struggling, we came up with this one. We call it a looper. So imagine that this is a 3 o'clock tilt or 270 degrees pitch. If you're looking at that from above, we call it a looper because if you watch the ball spinning around my little finger there, I see a seam looping around that point in space. And if you go back to that map, let me see if I can get back to that map efficiently. Yeah, that means that that seam is kind of always in this region, or it is a lot of the time. That's what we're after here. Okay, so they're from above and from the side. So a lot of people have seen this presentation, and it's probably my own fault. Think that I'm advocating for throwing this pitch. I'm not necessarily doing that at all. If you want to throw a seam shifted wake and you only can throw 100% efficiency, this is your option, or the one that I know about. But if you're going to see in a minute, if you add a little gyro, there's a lot more options that you have. But this is what we did in the lab, and we're going to fire them 55 feet. Thank you to Tom Tango, who I think is on the call, who straightened me out that I should be doing this at 55 feet. I really appreciate that, that we didn't waste our time taking a whole bunch of data at 60. So we use the same cannon. We're going to fire it with the same cannon, and we're going to use this 270-degree axis. You'll see that in a second. After it travels 55 feet, it passes a high-speed camera, and it's also measured by a ball tracking system, which was a Rapsodo 1.0. And you'll see that in the results here. So I'll spend a little time on this little clip. First of all, Rapsodo assumes that you have a human being winding up and throwing the ball, and it speeds up and slows down the video to correspond to that. And unfortunately, our Canon doesn't resemble that in any way. And so the timing here is a little odd. But you can see the Rapsodo down here. This is back when it sat on a tripod behind. It was actually perfect for this because Rapsodo 1 tells you exactly where the ball went. You can see it in the strike zone down here. That was very helpful for us. It doesn't infer anything. It just says that's where it arrived. I want to point out some, I should say this is the loop on the top. So this is just like this picture. This is the way it's spinning. I say picture, but this is a movie and it doesn't, okay, it's spinning exactly like that. Okay, so I'm sorry, here we go. Look at the metrics here. It's a 90 mile an hour, about 1200 RPM. We were kind of aiming at Strasbourg change-up kind of numbers. 99% efficiency, it's really 100. That's a small measurement error. It says it's braking 15 inches to the right because of Magnus. And you can see that the tilt is 3 o'clock, which corresponds to 270 degrees. It says that it didn't break at all vertically, or half an inch, and I'm sure that that's not worth talking about. So watch the video. Oh, one other thing I'd point out, you can see that flex tip is sideways because we're trying to spin the ball, put pure sideways on the side spin on the ball. Ask yourself, if you were the catcher back there, do you think that ball did anything funny? Maybe catchers always know this better than pitchers, probably because that's a better point of view from the other end. But I don't think that anybody would say, yeah, that moved funny, or there's something other than Magnus effect going on here. So now we're gonna take the baseball, which was in the jaw, kind of like this, and I'm simply going to turn it 180 degrees. So it's now like that. Sorry, let me try that again. My jaw's like this, I put the ball in like that, and that's the loop on the top. And now I'm going to move it so the loop is on the bottom. That's the only difference in this set of data. And the first thing I want to point out is none of these metrics really changed appreciably. They're all still exactly the same. It says, Rapsodo says it's still moving 15 inches to the right. It's not moving vertically at all. But notice that the arrival location of that pitch is pretty radically different. In fact, it's more than 8 inches off. I'm going to flip back to the other one here. You can see that difference in the arrival location. And this is not an anecdote. We repeated this over and over again, and we found this generally to be true. So I think there's anything else I need to say here. I think that's it. So overlaying those two, you can see the, almost 2/3 of the strike zone difference in where those balls arrived, in spite of the fact that according to everything that we were assuming to be true as of a few weeks ago, really, those are the identical pitch. And Rapsodo saw them all as identical. So, and you can see the two baseballs right there. This is what they look like as they go by. These are not acquired at the same time. It's just superimposed. And so we just did that to make sure that what we're seeing was not due to the ball changing its orientation as it flew. So this is the end result of that entire study, which, by the way, is now published in this journal down here. Just recently came out. I'm going to walk you through here. This is the strike zone, essentially, from the pitcher's point of view. And we've made the center of the strike zone 0, 0, where a pitch arrives if we have it straight to seam at 3 o'clock. So this should have no seam effects. They shouldn't do anything in that case. So we make that our baseline. And then the seam shifted pitches, let's start with the red and the blue here. The red is a loop on the bottom, the blue is a loop on the top. Now, the entire point here was to try to make this ball move upward or downward, and that's what we expected, and that happened. But it also moved to the left in the case of the loop on the top, and to the right in the case of loop on the bottom. We still don't know how that happened. Remember that this is 15 inches of break here, so that makes this like 19 inches of break, and that makes that at like 11. So what this is saying is that we, in addition to making movement in the direction 90 degrees from Magnus, which is along the axis, we also induced movement in addition to or subtracting from Magnus. So all of that is possible depending on how you orient the seams. So before I forget, these all have the same axis, RPM, and speed. So that's what I've always thought of a pitch as being these parameters. They also have the same release point and the same release angle and all that because the cannon doesn't change. Lastly, we had two different baseballs. This one had a bigger seam. It was about a 30% bigger seam just by measuring with the micrometer on the top of the ball. These had a smaller seam, and you see the amount of break that we're getting out of the bigger seam balls is about 20% more than the smaller seam ball. So a 30% bigger seam got us 20% more break. So I think it is sensitive to that. And that's one of the things that's interesting is, and when I start showing you data from MLB games on pitchers that do this, you're going to see quite a bit of scatter in it. And I think the reason it scatters so much, one of the reasons is simply that the ball that they're using is not always the same. We did a second test, what we call scuff ball. And this actually, we did this one first. So we had the previous day in our desperation, we had literally scuffed the baseball with sandpaper to make something happen. It was a big day for me because I think I saved my students' attitude towards this entire project by making something happen. In fact, the scuffed baseball moved so far, we missed our target and hit the back wall. It was really exciting. So we started asking ourselves, how do we make a baseball look like it's scuffed when it's not? And the answer we came up with is just to put the seam right on where the axis is. So to compare this to a looper would have the axis going through about where this P is. And this is just a small change from that. And the result was pretty much the same. Now, if you're sharp, you might have noticed this is a fastball configuration where we were doing 3 o'clock before. So this is 180. So now the ball is fighting gravity from its spin. And we got a very similar result when we put that scuff on one side of the ball, not on the other. And we're still planning on repeating this test to try to find out why that was. I think basically when you go to these, we have a very small piece of seam. It's maybe from here to here that's influencing the ball now. And with the looper, it was a little wider. And with the pitches I'm about to show you, it's even wider than that. You might have 3/4 of the ball that's involved in that separation that I've been talking about. And so I think that's why this was very touchy, and it just didn't work in that particular case. So disclaimers, these are all what I call I'm told I can swear around baseball people, but I'm not going to do it. They're bad baseballs. They're from 2019. They had the smallest seams I think that we've ever seen in the major leagues. They and I've shown you that I think that this effect is bigger with better seams. And so this is probably the worst it could be. Hopefully we'll never see anything worse than this. These are all 90 miles an hour and low RPM. We haven't really tested off of that condition. There's no humans involved. We're repeating this over and over again. The orientation relative to gravity may matter. So I'm not exactly sure what 270 versus 180 does to this. And the reason that that can matter is that when you're 180, the ball falls, and that may change the hemisphere plane I was talking about before. So that's a subtle thing that could change things. Here's the takeaway. Here's what I'm hoping that you will accept is that seams can matter. And seam shifted wake can add or take away from Magnus effect. Those are the big ones. Okay, so now moving to the wild, or to I think everything I'm going to show you here, almost everything is from a major league game. This is really was the start of this. I was looking at sinkers, and it's funny because we've come full circle now. I'm going to talk a lot about sinkers at the end. But it was Trevor Bauer that got us started on this. I think he got a lot of people thinking about that. That's his pitch on the right. He called it Laminar Express. That's a more, I think, less seam shifted case on the left with Stroman. And you see that the Laminar Express pitch seems to explode upward and outward. Interesting. I got to talk to Trevor Bauer about this pitch, and he said he was sick that day. And I don't think that's a coincidence. He said, and this pitch wasn't unique. He threw several that he said moved like this that day. And I believe, and maybe if you want, we can talk about this later, but I believe that's a direct effect of gyro, that pitchers that are not quite themselves tend to throw them with more gyro than people that are on top of everything. I also think that's the reason there's a commonly held belief that sinker ballers are better on short rest. The ball is more lively. And I think it's probably directly because they get more gyro when they're on short rest. And as I'm going to show you in a minute, that helps a lot. So before I move on, I want to just mention, I keep talking about orientation, and the subtle differences you see in some of these pitches all come from the ball being oriented differently compared to its axis. And I think most people have never thought about this before, but those are two independent things. These two baseballs have the same axis, same gyro and same two-dimensional axis, same tilt. And if you watch them carefully, you can see that they don't look like they're spinning exactly the same. One of them is oriented about 20 degrees off of the other. So this is another degree of freedom that all pitchers have when they throw the ball. They can orient it any way they want. They tend to orient it in a way that they can spin it the way they want to based on the seams. But what this is going to require, being good at seam shifted wake, I think is going to require that we free that up a little bit and we don't make that the primary consideration anymore. So when we started off, we were pretty focused on seam shifted wake pitches near 270 degrees. And the reason for that was that if I have a pitch like that, which would be either a changeup or a low arm slot sinker, then my Magnus effect is going to be straight sideways from the catcher's point of view. And so if I have seam shifted wake effect downward, like in the case of that looper there, I can see that really easy in the data that we were getting back then on Savant or Brooks or whatever. If there's any downward movement of this, I know it's not coming from Magnus. Most right-handed pitchers, with a few exceptions, even the guys that are pretty low, only have Magnus upward on their fastballs, on their sinkers and changeups. I said any sinker, changeup, or four-seamer, the Magnus will always be upward. Maybe it's small, but it's upward. So if I see downward force on there, I knew that that had to be from seam shifted wake. So that was my that was where I started out. And recently I've realized that it's entirely possible for the seam shifted wake force to go in almost any other direction you want. In fact, it could go exactly the opposite of that. And I've already shown that. That's what Looper did. I made it go up or down. It could also go this way, or it could go that way. So it's really pretty free to be anywhere it wants. Based on the way that pitchers normally grip a ball, it does tend to be normal to Magnus and in a certain direction. But I think that once we free pitchers up from, or once we suggest to them that they hold the ball a little differently, we'll see it going all over the place. Remember that nobody in the majors, other than Jared Hughes, that I know of, was doing this on purpose this year, or that's ever admitted it to me. So, like I said, I was initially pretty fixed on changeups and sinkers. This is Strasburg's changeup, which Michael Augustine dubbed a disco ball because of the way it spins. And getting worried about my computer here. I think I'm okay though. So, and that thing just dives down, and you hear a lot about it. It's one of the best changeups in baseball. I posted some stuff on Twitter today about his teammate Scherzer, Scherzer, and there was a couple of these changeups, and he throws it on almost the same axis that moved downward 5 degrees in short form, or 5 inches in short form, which is pretty amazing because the Magnus on this pitch is up. It's small, but it's upward. So, like I said, I liked that at first because I could see it. The Magnus effect and the seam shifted wake effect were pretty separated, and I could tell that was going on. So I used to spend a lot of time in these talks trying to convince everybody that that Savant data could prove this to me. The next step in our progression was when I met Jared Hughes about April this year. He's a low arm slot sinker baller. And we started focusing a lot on his sinker rather than these changeups. I had the cooperation of the player, which helped me a ton. But when I go and look at Brooks on him, this is the same kind of analysis I would have done on Scherzer or on Strasburg. What I noticed is that on the right circumstance, he's getting negative movement on that pitch. It should have vertical positive movement. It's accelerating downward. This line is gravity. And to the left of the line means it's pushing downward. To the right of the line, it means it has lift. And so more than half the time, his sinker is moving downward with more than the force of gravity. So I used to hang my hat on that. During the off time between spring training and Major League getting going again, Hughes was working out in his backyard and sending me the video every day. And we would analyze these pitches. I would use Trip Summers' spin visualizer to try to figure out what the orientation of these pitches were, and then to run them through our model to see what we'd expect. And this one should move downward. One of the really surprising outcomes of that was one day he showed me a four-seamer. I didn't even know he threw one. He doesn't throw it very often, but this four-seamer seemed to move upward. And what you're going to see here is that this isn't just this isn't special at all. This is very, very common in the majors. So I'll talk more about those a little later on. I'm going to show you a bunch of data now from major leagues. And but first I need to explain, in case you don't know, I think most people here probably know this, but there is this concept of an inferred axis of the ball. And this is what TrackMan spits out. This is what you've seen on Brooks and on Savant until this year. When you read an axis of a pitch, it's inferred from a Magnus model. Basically what they do is they measure the movement of the ball. They get a vertical and horizontal movement, and they get the RPM of the ball from TrackMan or something like that. And they run that through a model and say, well, the axis, if everything that's happening is Magnus, the axis must be like this or whatever it is. We call that inferred axis. And it's usually presented on Brooks, it'd be presented in terms of degrees, with 0 being at the bottom, 180 straight up and 270 to the right. So a 3/4 arm slot fastball is usually 220 degrees or something like that. 270 would be a pure side armor. Well, things have changed, and now we can see this directly. I'll talk about that on the next slide, how that happens. But if we know what the axis actually is because of Hawkeye or because of Rapsodo or anything that's optical like that, and it does not match this inferred axis, then I know something's up. And that's basically how we're analyzing the data now. So Hawkeye came along this year. I can't remember when I first heard about Hawkeye coming, but as soon as I heard what it was, I realized it was going to blow all this wide open. I was a little worried that it would make our work kind of irrelevant. I'm not worried about that anymore. I think it's really validated everything I've been saying for more than a year now, and it feels very good finally to have that vindication. If you're not familiar with it, it's a camera-based system, whereas TrackMan was a radar-based system. There's a whole array of cameras, but I'm focused on this one. It sits in the center field wall. It looks right past the release point into home plate. And it actually images the ball as it flies. It takes about 30 pictures of the baseball as it flies. And it does an analysis very much like what a Rapsodo does to figure out the axis of the ball. I'm not saying it's the same algorithm. I don't really know anything about the algorithms, but it's using the same input. So I made the claim a little while ago, pitching is going to be divided neatly, the pre-Hawkeye and post-Hawkeye. Everything, I mean, we're learning new stuff now, and I think this is going to change everything. We're removing all the mystery from baseball. I hope nobody minds that. I'm a little sad about that myself. I feel like I'm killing something beautiful. I have a set of Hawkeye data here. This is raw data. So this is showing you 29 pictures of the baseball as it flies. It's a little subtle here, but if you look at this one, it's a little bigger than that one. And that's because this is release and this is as it nears home plate. You would think it'd be a bigger difference, but remember that camera is 400 feet away and it's zoomed way in. So that 60 feet doesn't matter that much. So it covers most of the pitch flight. I'm told it's 100 frames per second. I'm told that there's some secret sauce that they use in order to convert that into RPM. But that you can use that to determine the RPM and the three-dimensional axis of the ball. Currently, Major League Baseball is releasing 2D axes to the public. I've had a lot of people ask me where you can get it. It is on the MLB public API if you know how to swallow that. I think there's a few people out there that do. So it's there. It's there to be picked up. So far, MLB is not releasing efficiency or if you will, gyro information. And that we can do a lot without that. I think if we had that piece, we could settle a few more mysteries. From what I've seen so far, I think this is very accurate. I think it's at least as accurate as TrackMan was, and maybe even better. It does, I say it's prone to occasional obvious misreads. Let me say two things about that. Obvious misreads are not dangerous because they're easy to see and remove. And I'm also recently been told that this was something that the misreads I've seen were mostly at the beginning of the season when the personnel were still learning how to use this system. And it's probably not going to be as much of an issue in the future, so which is great. So the way these plots are going to work here, I'm going to have optical axis on one side. Actually, it's going to be called observed axis, but it's still OA. I forgot to go back and change this plot. And then the inferred axis over here. So a right-hander will generally throw bigger than 180 degrees and a left-hander will throw less than 180 degrees. If you look at this picture here, there's a diagonal line across these. And basically if you're on that diagonal line, well, that means, let me use my slide the way it was intended. The optical axis comes from the photographs of the baseball from Hawkeye. The inferred axis comes from Magnus models. It's still Hawkeye data. It's just Hawkeye data where they take the movement and infer the axis from that in the same way it used to be done with TrackMan. So Hawkeye is measuring more data, more different things than TrackMan used to. But we can still do the computations the same way that TrackMan does. And then if a pitch lies on that line, that means that the Magnus model worked and everything was fine. So we're going to be focused on the ones where it doesn't. This is all explained in a recent Baseball Perspective article that I co-authored with Alan, Nathan, and Harry. And I strongly encourage you to take a look at that. The rest of the talk from now on is mostly stuff that was in that article or stuff like that was similar to what's in that article. So this is a kind of a counterexample I wanted to use. This is Trevor Bauer's fastball. And it's a interesting case because I mentioned before, and probably a lot of you knew, that Bauer was the one that started talking about this in the first place, about making seams make the ball change. And their Driveline had an article on the same topic just a little bit before us. And they mentioned that Trevor Bauer was like the least seam shifted guy out there. And I looked into that a little bit, and I actually talked with Trevor about it a little bit because I found it so ironic. And the reason for it is he doesn't throw a two-seamer anymore. He threw about a dozen of them this year. And the dozen he threw behaved like everybody else's two-seamer. It's just that when you spin the ball as well as he does and you throw as hard as he does, a four-seam fastball high in the zone works pretty well. And that's what he's doing most of the time. These lie right on the line. I think the extent to which they don't lie on the line is it's probably measurement error or maybe small changes in his release. I don't have it in here, I don't think, but Cole Hamels has a very similar result, except for that his blob is diagonal because the two axes are actually correlated to each other. When one goes up, the other one goes up too, which means that the measurement error, it seems to be very impressive that the two measurements agree real well, and that there's not this randomness that seems to be here. So here's but other times, this is Kyle Hendricks, who's somebody I enjoy watching. On a different night, you'd find me with the Cubs hat on. And you see that his pitches are way off the line. The inferred axis is much bigger than the observed axis. This says that his ball is moving more to the arm side than it should for the amount of Magnus effect that it has on it. This is a laminar express. This is what Bauer was talking about all those years ago. And the epiphany that we had, or the revelation just in the last few weeks, is to find out that this is typical. This is a very good one, but it's pretty normal. Almost all two-seam fastballs are seam shifted by at least 10 degrees. 90% of them are shifted at least 10 degrees. I have his inferred axis average and optical here. You can see they're about 35 degrees apart. So his ball moves like it's tilted 30 degrees more than it is. Another way to think about this is if he wanted to get that same movement out of his sinker, he'd have to drop down 30 degrees in order to do it. But he can do it from the same release point as his four-seamer. In fact, his four-seamer has exactly the same optical axis as this sinker. And it has the same amount of total movement in the short form as his sinker. So the seam shifted wake effect changes his movement from being mostly upward to mostly glove side. Other guys I've looked at, they might have a similar shift, but they lose movement. There's a couple people that actually have additional movement compared to their fastball. And you can see that in that article. Mays is one of those guys, which I'm sure surprises nobody. His Demon two-seamer has a lot of Magnus and a lot of seam shifted wake force on it. Here's another example from the World Series, Blake Trenian. And Trenian, I'm not sure how to say his name. He's got about 24 degrees difference in those two axes. And I put him in here because Michael got me this great clip of what that thing looks like. And then there's the guys that inferred axis was never meant for. And I want to use my poster child is always Jared Hughes, whose given name is William. I should have updated that. But this is his fastball and his sinker. And as I mentioned before, his fastball moves upward and his sinker moves downward. This is what this is showing us. And I thought that this was super special. I mentioned this on Twitter the other day. He and I had a bet. Jared's a very nice man, and he would not bet me any money. But I was ready to do it. We're doing an over and under, and how many pitchers do this in the majors. And my guess was I said over under 20, and I took the under. He said I think it's going to be 30, and I came up with exactly 30 that are doing this to have 20 degrees difference between their fastball and their sinker. And I'll show you a couple more here. First of all, just repeating these videos from that Jared made for me this summer, you can see the release of those two fastballs was nearly identical. That's a sinker on the top and a four-seamer on the bottom. And you can see, especially towards the end of their flight, one's moving up and the other one's moving down. That's what the data was showing us. The Hawkeye data is showing us the same thing. Here's Brad Keller. He's a young pitcher on the the Royals. I think he was number 1 on my list. This is Max Fried, who everybody got a good taste of in the World Series this year, and Framber Valdez, who also went deep, is a big one too. Now some of these guys throw more one pitch than the other, but in each of these cases, you see the two blobs moved in opposite directions. So this is not, it's not everybody. If you have, if you have a high efficiency fastball, this won't happen. So tends to be the low efficiency, low spin guys, the guys that are getting less out of their Magnus effect, that are getting a lot out of these seam shifted wakes. This is a plot from our article, and Alan and Nathan made this plot. This is showing all the four seams, change-ups, and sinkers that were thrown in the majors this year on that same kind of plot. And it's a little subtle, but still super important to note that the right-handers all have that sinker moving more to the glove side than it should, whereas the four-seamers you see are kind of biased on the other side. It's much more common for the sinker than it is for the four-seamer, but it's also pretty obvious that something's going on here too. And the left-handers are just opposite of that. Change-ups behave mostly like the sinker. There's not nearly as many of them, so the picture is not as clear, which is kind of funny because this is really where I started my focus. But I think some of these are huge. Some of them are not doing much at all. And then this plot I could spend probably half a day talking about. This is the normalized movement in inches compared to how much axis shift they are. When I say axis shift, I'm saying the observed minus the inferred axis. And this is telling us some pretty interesting stuff. It's telling us that I can get a big shift in my four-seamer, but when I do, I'm losing movement. And I think the reason is here, and we have to infer that, we have to guess this because we don't have the efficiency data, but I think these are basically inefficient pitches. The further I go out here, the less efficiency I have. So I'm losing Magnus effect, and the four-seamer doesn't have the ability to make up for that with seam shifted wake. So I'm getting seam shifted wake, but it's costing me more Magnus than I'm making up. Now contrast that with the sinker here, and you can see that this has got this flat region. It's really hard to say what the baseline is here. Maybe we should say it's the same, it's the four seam, I don't know. I mean, these aren't necessarily the same pitchers, right? This could be Garrett Cole here, who may not throw so many sinkers. But we have this flat spot in there. And I think there's this region in here where you can add gyro in order to get this seam shifted wake going without killing your Magnus, or with those two trading off. So Hendricks is in here. Mays, I think, is one of these guys up here. It gets a big, I guess he should, yeah, he's a right-hander. He's getting a big shift, but he's also getting a lot of Magnus movement. Change-ups, again, it's kind of hard to say. There's definitely something going on. The data is a little too scattered to really make a conclusion about what that's saying. So one of the things that I criticize some of my colleagues for is when they show video of themselves lecturing. It's one of the lamest things in the world. But I'm going to do it right now because this object lesson I'm about to do here, whenever I try to do this live, I end up pointing in the wrong direction at least once. And I do it a couple times here too, because it's hard to look at a mirror image of yourself when you're trying to explain directions. That's my excuse. So I'm just going to play this. I hope that you can hear it. Try to explain why seam shifted wake makes a four-seamer go one way while a two-seamer goes the other way. So I have here the ball that I've used in the past to demonstrate kind of a laminar express orientation. You can see this seam by my thumb here that looks like it's sitting in one place. I've been pretty hung up on orientation in the past. I'm probably going to walk that back a little bit. So I'm starting to believe that it's not as important as I thought. But still, we see a lot of pitches that have this telltale seam steady in one place. And this one's designed to kind of optimize that. So if I am a pitcher that throws the ball at 12 o'clock, I'm going to hold that ball something like that and spin it backward. And when I do, I realize that that's a split finger pitch, but as I've said before, I'm not a pitcher, so apologize for that. I don't have any seams near the region that's important, which is slice through the ball in this direction, right through the center of the ball, vertically, if the ball is moving towards you. However, if I add an element of gyro to that, so that one end of the stick is closer to you than the other, like this, and I spin that ball again, now I can see that there is a seam that is near that hemisphere plane most of the time right here. And that could be done better or worse. In some cases, it's in a more optimal position and the ball will move more. That's basically how that laminar express ball works. If I take just a straight two seam and I do the same thing, and again, I'm just imagining somebody that throws straight over the top so that this axis is horizontal. Now, if I add a bit of gyro to it, I have the same thing, maybe not quite, oh, sorry, yeah, sorry, it's over here. Same thing, maybe not quite as optimally, but I have a seam that's underneath my finger there most of the time. And that's going to cause the ball to deflect that way, arm side. Okay, now let's focus on a four seam. So if I have a four seam thrown straight over the top and it's back spinning like this, these seams that are kind of in the middle of the ball here are going to, at one point, cause the wake to flap up or down, but the net result of that is going to be zero. It's just going to cause the wake to oscillate more. The ones on the ends here can't do anything because whatever this is going to do, that's going to undo. A quarter turn later. So it's just because everything's symmetric, there is no force in the ball. Now, if I add gyro to it, when I say gyro, I'm always talking about the type you typically get from a player of bat-handedness. So for a right-hander, it would mean that this arm side of the ball is closer to home plate than the other side. Now these seams are going to cause early separation on this side. The seams on the other side are now in the wake of the ball and they don't do anything. And so that's going to cause the ball to move glove side. That's why four seamers move the opposite direction of two seamers from seam shifted wake effects. Okay, that video is on YouTube if you want to watch it again, and if you're struggling with that. And if you're struggling with this, I really recommend shoving a rod through a ball. It really helps a lot to explain this stuff. My machinist Terry would be happy to do it for maybe $100 a piece, something like that, or you can find your own machinist. Yeah, I'd like to. So here's what I see as the path forward. I think I hope I've convinced you that seams affect break, and that this is common in MLB. This has always been happening in baseball. What remains to be seen is how best to use it. Is this a good thing for a pitcher or not? Or does it depend on what kind of pitcher you are, which is the case, what I think is the case. I don't think it's a coincidence that the guy with the biggest axis shift to his sinker is Kyle Hendricks, or he's one of the biggest. You frequently hear people talk about how much his ball moves. Well, how does his ball move so much when he throws it 90 miles an hour with 1800 RPM? I don't, it's weird to me that nobody ever asked that question before. So I think it makes someone like Kyle Hendricks a superstar because, everybody else or most guys that are superstars are spinning the ball more like 2500 RPM and throwing it 98 miles an hour. So what's left to be seen is how to use it. And then what I'm really excited about and what I think USU can contribute is other new pitches. These pitches that I've been showing you are all ones that people just happen to throw because they like to hold the baseball that way. That's really what it comes down to. It's just, if you pick up a baseball, it's kind of natural to say, well, I'm either going to hold it like that or I'm going to hold it like that. And I think that's really all there is to it. And then over time, I think that the catcher tells them, yeah, that looked good, do it more like that or less like that. And that's generated some of these small perturbations off of that. But I think if we free ourselves, there are other bigger changes that we can make that could generate huge seam effects. We have a way to model that. This is called, we call this UMBA. This was originally written by Andrew. It is currently based on that crude model that I talked about earlier, where we just assume that if a seam is in a certain range, it causes separation in a given amount of force. But we're trying to make that more nuanced, trying to account for the fact that in some cases the wake is tilted more than others and things like that. But the idea of the model is I think really slick. It actually simulates the ball spinning relative to the right direction it's flying, and it notes when there are seams in this region where they're going to cause separation. They're colored green here. So that's what allows us to then compute how much force that's going to generate as the ball flies. And it also accounts for the fact that the ball's direction is changing over time so that the hemisphere plane can change. These dots here are the volume of where the seams matter. And if you watch, they are subtly changing over time. This is just showing one rotation of the ball. But if that kept going, you would see that volume change as the direction of the ball changed. So I think once we have this model ready to go, we can simply ask it to try every single combination of axis and orientation and gyro and look at what it comes up with and say, there's the good ones. Let's find a way to throw that pitch. And I think that will be truly revolutionary to baseball. So what's remaining, we have a lot of parameter space to look at. Like, as I've said, we've only looked at 90 miles an hour and pretty low RPM or non-spinning baseballs. So we have speed, axis orientation, gyro, and seam height that are left to look at, which is a lot of space. We're also, John, this is John's data here. He's been finding kind of scary cases like this where a very small change in orientation has a very big effect, and we want to better understand where those are. Obviously, this kind of thing could ruin your prediction on where a baseball is going to go. So in conclusion, seams cause the wake to form early on the side they're on. If there's a seam on one side, not the other, that makes a force on the ball. If you can maintain that, the ball will break. If you can keep that seam there most of the time, it'll change the direction of the ball. Hawkeye data makes that really, really easy to see. Seam shifted wake can make a pitcher who lacks elite spin elite. That is my Kyle Hendricks statement. I don't mean to pick on Kyle, but I think a lot of us are surprised he does so well. And he's amazing to watch. I believe that there are more seam shifted wake pitches that we haven't discovered yet. We can help you find them if you're interested. And I say that when I say we, I'm not talking to the high school kids and to the college coaches that are here, but there's a lot of major league guys. I'm talking to you. So yeah, that's my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I see a lot of questions here. Hey, John and Nat, are you guys covered there, or should we cover these questions?
Yeah. So do you want me to explain it more? Because I didn't write it very clearly.
Sure.
Yeah. So in that picture where you had the movement changes based on if it seam shifted or not with the 2-seamer, the 4-seamer, and the changeup, the red and green dots. So is that difference in movement just like total movement difference? So let's say I'm throwing a 4-seam fastball.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it says 1 less inch of movement. Could that theoretically be 1 more inch of carry and 2 less inches of arm side run?
Yeah.
Or do you have
all of that is
broken out?
Yeah, we have it broken out, but it's not broken out in that plot. We just combined it all to make the picture more easy to look at. You're talking about this plot?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
You know,
that is total. And there are cases where it is more in one direction and less in another. And that was my point that I was trying to make when I said that small changes in the orientation can have a radical effect on what direction this is pushing. So if that seam is going around the top of the ball, it's going to make the ball go down. If it starts to end up, on the side of the ball and a little bit on the top, it'll make it go down and to the right at the same time. And then, theoretically, all these things are possible 180 degrees off of that. If you take the same pitch and you just stick it in the pitcher's hand 180 degrees different, and he could still spin it the same way, it's going to break. The seam shifted effect will be in the opposite direction. So this includes all of that, and some of these are high arm slot people and some of them are low arm slot people, but what we're trying to show here, the point of this plot when we made it is that seam shifted weight can cost you Magnus movement.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Anybody else have one that refers to the slides before I get out of the slides? So Alex Fast asked, average seam height changed a bit in 2019. How drastic an impact does that have? I think it's rather drastic. I think, like I said, we first of all, most people have never had the opportunity to sit there with 72 Major League Baseballs. There's a bunch of Major League people here, maybe you have, and actually measure them. It's kind of shocking how much they vary from one baseball to the next. It's easy. In our sample of 72, we had our average of something like 33 thousandths of an inch height, and they went up to almost 40 thousandths. They went down to 20. So we just reached into our stash and we grabbed 2 that were about 30% difference, and we got a 20% different amount of break as a result of that. So yeah, if you're a pitcher and you're not throwing out the low seam balls, I think you're just flat out stupid these days, because not only will the low seam ball not break as much, it will also fly farther by quite a bit.
Have you tried for fun to try and get balls from like regulation KBO balls, regulation NPP balls, and seen how they react?
No, we started with high school baseballs, but I have a few NCAA balls, both the old one and the new one. But that's all we've ever looked at. There's already so much parameter space. The last thing I want to do is change the brand of baseball that we're using.
Sure, sure.
But I think it matters. In fact, and I'm not saying this to disparage them in any way, but we were talking to Diamond Kinetics early on, and they tell me that they modeled their ball after a minor league ball, and it looks all, for all the world like any other baseball with a low seam, but we could not get it to do the looper. And I have no idea why that was. I didn't measure those seams at the time. Maybe they were small, but they didn't seem small. So it definitely matters. I also would like to go back and retest high school baseballs that aren't all scuffed up, because the main reason is that my kid's 14 and I'm trying to tell him if he should mix up his four-seamer, his two-seamer or not. So I'm starting at the bottom of these questions. I'm not sure if these are the most, these are the most recent. So Holler, if you asked one earlier, does the velocity of a ball affect the 6 to 18 degree wake separation that you measured? And that's a great question. I have no idea. We've done, it's a big task to do one speed. And because we have to put the baseball in there in different orientations and then fire it several times that way. And collect all that data. So it's very expensive to do. Obviously it's important, 90 degrees is, we just chose what we thought was the most practical speed, but everything else is important too. I see another question here, is looper two seam? This is a looper right here. And it's not really two seam. It's like kind of a seriously tilted two seam. So this is a good question, and I want to spend just a little time with it. This is what I would call a laminar express. You can see where that axis comes out. This is a looper. So you can see it's a little closer to that horseshoe. And if I compare the laminar express to a two seam, you can see there's a little difference there too. So it's just, those are three variations of the orientation in one direction of the baseball. There's two different directions that you could reorient the baseball. Is it possible to identify high school, collegiate, MLB arms who have these tendencies on their pitches, or is that impossible because of the lack of Hawkeye data? I think it's possible. I think anytime, and I know there's a lot of coaches on this call, anytime you have a player whose Rapsodo data does not match TrackMan data, which I think a lot of players have, that's your tip off, because TrackMan is telling you an inferred axis, and Rapsodo is telling you an optical axis, or observed. And so if you have both of them, you can simply subtract them, and that's telling us what Hawkeye's telling us. In fact, Jared and I were batting this around last night. He's going to buy TrackMan so that he already has a Rapsodo. So we'll get that. By putting those two together, you're essentially getting the same thing I'm showing you here. But Hawkeye, I don't know if Hawkeye is going into collegiate stadiums at all. I don't know if there's any talk of that. I have no idea what a Hawkeye system costs compared to a TrackMan system. Is it? I'm having a hard time keeping up. I'm going to go to the. I'm sorry to the people who are asking questions right now. I'm going to go to the top because that's my hope. Bruce Billings, did we answer your question yet? Oh, he said thanks. Thank you, Bruce. Nice sweatshirt. Yeah, I agree with that. How do the low pressure points shift on a knuckleball? Well, so what would happen in a knuckleball? My friend Doug gave me this baseball. This is product placement. This is his company, LaVision, and they made these baseballs. So he was supposed to be on this call, and I kicked him off to make space for somebody else. But he's going to watch the video. The way that it would happen. So say that you threw the ball and it's moving this way, and it's perfectly still like this. If this seam starts to cause separation, then basically the ball is going to have higher pressure on this side than this side. It's going to move down. And as I've shown in that one video, that's going to reorient the ball in some kind of random way. And then that effect could change to the other side. and it happens so slowly that the ball can actually go two directions, I think, in rare cases. So that's my hand wavy argument about that. Yeah, okay, I got that one. John said majority of data we collected was with 2019 balls. And on average, the seam height was lower in 2019. Data we've taken with high seam balls have shown that the area around the hemisphere plane where the seams have an impact on the flow is larger for balls with higher seams. So that would, that map would basically expand. Okay, a little talk of KBO. Joe says, in addition to movement in the same direction of magnets due to the seams being +6 to -18 zone, longer for seam shifted wake than for Magnus. I think I understand your question, and it's a good one. And I think that the extent to which you can shift the wake for Magnus or seams is similar. If you try to shift it too far, there's a lot of fluid dynamics fighting against you, and it's the same for both cases. That's why I mentioned that our looper tests were done at very low RPM, and we managed to make Magnus bigger or smaller. I think if the Magnus was bigger, if we were spinning that ball 3,000 RPM, we wouldn't impact that so much. It'd already be maxed out. And at the low RPM, we were able to add and subtract from it. And I hope that addresses that a little bit. Brandon Webb had to have done this, and he may have done it somehow with his curveball too. I didn't show it. Alan made a plot similar to the ones I showed for curveballs, and they were really boring. So I was surprised and a little sad to see that, but I don't think this happens a lot on curveballs. The slider data is so crazy, I am afraid to even look at it. One of the things about this is that when your efficiency is poor, that data tends to get spread way out. The inferred axis can move a lot, becomes very sensitive to it. So sliders, since they don't have much Magnus going on in the first place, the inferred axis tends to be really scattered. So it's hard to sort out what's going on there. When you talk about four seamers losing movement with seam shifted wake, is that total movement? And I do mean total movement, yeah. Short form, I'm a short form guy. Harry's trying to get me to think more about long form because he tells me, and I believe him, that that's what hitters think about. I've been immersed, or I've been hanging around too many pitchers. So when I talk about movement, I'm usually talking about short form. And for those that don't know the difference, that long form movement includes gravity. So long form movement is negative all the time. Short form movement has the effect of gravity removed. Have you seen breaking balls with a difference in observed and inferred? And yeah, I think we'd see it on sliders, but not so much on curveballs. To be honest, we haven't looked at it a lot yet. Majority of pitchers in baseball use substances to increase spin. Yeah. Is there a hypothesis as to how a standard allowed substance or implementing attack your ball might affect seam shifted wake? I'm glad you asked. I don't think it would. The seam shifted wake would do the same thing if you're spinning the ball 1,000 RPM. That's the beauty of it in a way, is it takes the guy with bad spin and it makes him into an elite pitcher. So that's my message to the scouts and to the major league people here, is that the people you're looking for may not be the ones that we thought. You know, if you have somebody, I think these days everybody's told if your efficiency is 90%, you suck. And I'm here for those people because I think that there's a path for them too, and it's just as good. It's a different path. I answered that. Yeah, I answered Matthew's question. An issue we face with being able to diagnose seam shifted wake in real time. It is tough. Coaches working with pitchers on designing seam shifted wake pitches. Do you recommend leaning heavily on high-speed cameras as opposed to pitch tracking tech? What I really recommend is two different pitch tracking techs. One that measures movement. So you cannot buy tech in your gym that measures both the axis of the ball and the movement of the ball that I know of. You have one or the other. Rapsoda measures the axis, TrackMan measures the movement. If you put those two together, now you have the whole picture. And I think that will change, especially maybe as a result of some of this information. That I think it's definitely the reason that everybody leaves one out is that for a long time, everybody thought you didn't need them both. And now that we know you need them both, I'm hoping that people will start to work on ways to produce them both at the low cost that you get with something like a Rapsodo. Does that, yeah. Rapsodo plus TrackMan is a poor man's Hawkeye, and I came to that conclusion last night. I think that's true. I do think high-speed cameras are really important because high-speed cameras are the only way you're going to find out the orientation. You don't get orientation out of TrackMan. You don't get it out of Rapsodo currently. I'm told that you get it out of Yakkertech. It looks to me like they're only reporting one of the axes of it. Obviously, they have the capability of doing that. I think Rapsodo does too. I think if I were working for one of them, I'd be on that right now because you know, it's one thing to know that you got a seam shifted wake pitch. It's another thing to know why you got it and to be able to repeat it. And that's all about orientation. So I shouldn't do this, but yeah, I'm going to do it anyway. Let me show you a plot that I put the same plot on Twitter today. So it's not it's definitely no secret, but I don't think any, oh, no, yeah, I can use one that was in my slides. If you look at these seam shifted wake pitches like these, one of the things that you may notice about them is they're spread very far side to side, not as much up and down. Remember, up and down is the observed axis. This says that the pitcher is repeating his axis. He's spinning the ball the same way. But you see all this variation here, and this is real. This is not, I don't think this is a problem with Hawkeye or anything like that. This is saying that the inferred axis, or you can interpret this as the movement of these pitches was different a lot. And you can see that in all of these seam shifted pitches. And if you go back up to Bauer here on that four seamer, the least seam shifted pitch you can find, it's very narrow. And I think the reason is that the people that throw, well, some, you know, Hendricks can repeat his seam shifted wake pitch, but a lot of people can't. And they tend to vary a lot. And it seems to be different from pitcher to pitcher. But when I see this, what I assume is happening is that pitcher is not orienting the ball repeatedly, even if they're spinning it repeatedly. And so you're getting a lot of different amounts of seam shifted wake effects. So the plot I was just about to show you, which is not in my presentation, but this is Max Scherzer's changeup. And you can see that it is everything from pedestrian to outstanding. This is 290 degrees. That 290 degrees means that you're submarine by 20 degrees. And he's throwing it at 250. So he has a huge shift on that pitch, but a lot of them are ending up right on the line. So he's not consistent with that at all. And I think that that's typical of this stuff. It's another parameter. It's another thing to control, and that's obviously hard to do. But I think a lot of the reason for that is that people don't even realize it matters. So why bother trying to learn how to do that consistently when you don't realize that it's important? Let's see. Can you explain the backup slider physics? I can rip off somebody else's explanation. So if I throw a slider, I'm going to throw a slider like this. It's coming at you like that. So imagine that I throw a really bad slider and it's pure bullet spin coming at you. What happens is that has no Magnus effect while it's moving towards you. But it doesn't move towards you the entire pitch. It starts to fall. And if the pitch is moving this way, now the front of the ball has sideways movement on it. The front of the ball is no longer here. It's moving this way as the ball starts to fall. And that's, a lot of people believe the reason that cutters and sliders are so effective is they have, quote, late break, because they don't start to move sideways until they start to fall. And so the movement that they generate is small, but it happens late. And that's effective as a result. I buy into that, but it's not my argument. Softball pitch types, with the exception of risers, tracked by Rapsodo, tend to have similar spin directions, though visibly seem to move in different directions, and that's music to my ears. I'm really interested in softballs because they have huge seams. Given that softball pitches tend to be thrown with more gyro, which I didn't know, fastballs are 60 to 80% rather than 90. It's likely that the majority of softball movements actually seam shifted away instead of magnetic. I totally buy that. Yeah. And I'd love to study that. How much of the discrepancy between inferred axis and optical observed axis on sliders could be attributed to converting gyro to transverse and Magnus models doing a poor job of recognizing that? It depends on who's calculating it. So all the data that we had in baseball prospectus we used Alan Nathan's model, which accounts for that. And it's something he often points out that some models don't. So I think we have that covered. Variance versus replication could be a feature versus a bug. And that, yeah, I get that. Yeah, definitely true that you don't want your pitch to be totally predictable. But if that variance is purposeful, Hendricks has to replicate this because command and tunneling are big parts of his game. With more dynamic stuff, you could probably get away with more variance. Yeah, that's definitely true. Thank you, Jeff. One other thing I'd point out about Hendricks, and I just figured this out last night. Let me see if I can find a video for you. I got this from Rob Friedman last night. This is Hendricks's 2 changeups. He throws 2 different changeups, and those are the 2 releases. And it took me a minute to realize, first of all, this moves glove side, this moves arm side. And when I say move, I'm not talking about the movement you'd read off of Rapsodo. Oh, I'm not showing you guys anything. I'm sorry. You guys are just going to let me do that. Okay, here we go. So glove side on this one, arm side on that one. I'm talking about the axis shift. So this one moves, it moves arm side also, but it moves less than it should. This one moves more than it should. And if you look carefully, it took me a minute to realize that this one's 4-seam and that one's 2-seam. And they both have a lot of gyro. So it's exactly the same. This is basically a sinker and this is a 4-seam with a lot of gyro. This is exactly the same as Jared Hughes's sinkers, rotated a bit because he has a higher arm slot and spinning slower and moving slower. So it's the same thing. People say this cuts. And I'm struggling with that. Is cut just seam shifted wake? Boy, I don't know the answer to that. Let me see where we were here. Using Alan's spin efficiency model as well. Coach, I'm not sure what you mean there. It looks like you're referring to another question that you already asked. Yeah, if you want to clarify that question, I'm not sure about what that last part means. Using Alan's spin efficiency model as well. Generally, just as a blanket statement, if I say one thing and Alan says another, I'd believe him. Especially when it comes to all this dynamic stuff, he's quite a bit sharper than I am. Quite a bit more careful too. Any other questions? I'm fine if somebody wants to unmute and say one out loud. Is there a grip that you've seen that works best for a guy that throws a fastball with 90% efficiency? That's Hendricks's grip, basically. There's 2 different grips out there that I've seen. One they call a 1-seamer and one they call a sinker or a 2-seamer. I think Hendricks throws more of a 1-seamer. But the only thing I would say to that is, and I've been kind of dancing around this all night, you know, here is my, this is ideal, I think. And this is traditional. This is just if you stick your finger in the middle, your fingers down the middle of the ball and spin it, you'll get that. If you hold it a little bit more to one side, you'll get this. And what I want to point out to you, here's the bad one. Watch this spin. And what you see is a mess on those 2 seams, right? And this one, if I spin it, what I see is a nice distinct line here. That's better. I think that'll get you more movement. 90% is a good number, I think, for a sinker. I think if I'm talking to somebody 90 to 95, yeah, you want to throw things 2-seam versus 4-seam are going to have very distinct movements to them. Connor McGinnis, red circle of death. That sounds like a threat. Do I have a red circle on my forehead? All good things. Okay. I think that's more of a comment than a question, and everybody can see it. Anything? Oh yeah, there's another one. Xbox consoles used to get that when they were broken beyond repair. Okay. Jared tested everything at night and daytime. He believes, I hate speaking for him, but whenever you show him something weird in his data, the first thing he does is go and look at the weather on that day. He believes that wind is important. I kidded with him because his second to last game of the year, I thought it was going to be his last, but he got out one more time. It was pouring rain. And when he got off the field, I'm like, well, how does seam shifted wake work in the pouring rain? I'm not sure that it was a second half of a double header and it started to rain partway through. And you could tell that there's no way they're going to call that game off. And so he's just out there getting hosed. I think he finished that game. So wind changes the hemisphere plane. That'd be my my comment there. Seams matter a lot. If you scuff the ball, obviously it matters a lot. Some pitchers I've talked to whose names I won't mention tell me that scuffed baseballs are not nearly as rare as you would think, even though they're so diligently taken out of play that does happen. When we scuffed the baseball, we got it to move 2 feet in the wrong direction. So that's not subtle at all. I mean, the stuff that we're talking about here is much more subtle. I do think the seam height matters a lot. So we were trying to egg, Rob Friedman and I were trying to egg Garrett Cole into discarding baseballs in the 2019 World Series. I don't know if we ever, just by saying on Twitter, it's really be smart to get rid of the low seam baseballs. I'm not sure if we ever pulled that off or not. Some pitchers do seem to go through more than others. But at the same time, if you're a pitcher, I'm sure that you want the big seam because that's easy to hang on to. So that's probably what they've been looking for, which is turns out exactly what they want. You refer to seam shifted wake as a third force in the ball. Can it also be considered a modification to the Magnus or wake force? Yeah, absolutely. Whoever asked me about the slider movement, that argument that I gave you is from David Kaplan, I think is his name, professor, baseball PhD, he calls himself. And he pointed out to me, hey, Bart, you're calling this something different, but it's really just the same as Magnus. And I both agreed with him strongly and disagreed with him strongly. I think it has a lot in common with Magnus, but it doesn't depend on spin. And I don't think that, and it tends to be in a different direction too. Magnus has to be along or 90 degrees from the axis of the ball. And this seam shifted wake can be any direction you want, really. So to me, they are both similar and different. I see a little redhead. I'm looking at you. Well, if anybody has further questions, you feel free to fire them to me. I obviously enjoy talking about this. I'm going to I've recorded this. If you'd like a copy of it, email me and I will send you a link to it. I'm going to send it to all the folks that couldn't make it tonight too. Yeah, there's a lot. Let me just make my impassioned plea. There's a lot. I hope I've shown you this is important. And I hope nobody says, well, Bart's got this figured out, because I don't. There's a lot left. And it's all doable. We can sort this out. And I think it's a whole new dimension to pitching that's been there, but we haven't been using on purpose. And I think that will enrich the game even more. It's already a very rich game. And I think that be a lot more fun to watch, a lot more fun for pitchers anyway. That's my plea. And I see all the thank yous. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it. Appreciate a lot of the people here have been with me since the beginning and trusted me even before the data backed me up. So to all of you, I salute you and thank you for your support, because I needed it at various times through this. There was a lot of time where there was a lot of information out there that seemed to contradict us. And I think it's all been put to bed. To me, this is really obviously what's going on. And I appreciate the people that believe me even when I didn't have the concrete proof that we do today. You should probably be more skeptical, though. All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to